This is absolute nonsense. So I'm just saying we're going to put this in the nonsense category, and we never need to talk about this again. There's not just an absence of evidence. There's actually evidence of absence here. So resveratrol is a phenol. It's a chemical that activates sirtuins. So understandably, in all the early 2000s hoopla around sirtuins, the view was like, oh my God, like sirtuins are good. They're repairing DNA damage. Resveratrol is an activator of sirtuins. That's got to be good. Away we go. And so Denmark study, quote unquote, in 2006 garnered an unbelievable amount of attention. Now, I think the attention was just as much from the fact that in minuscule amounts, resveratrol is found in red wine. It wasn't just that, oh, we have another molecule that in some obscure mouse model maybe seems to extend life. I think it was, oh, and by the way, this molecule at about 1/100th the level is found in red wine. On a serious level, is this an explanation for the French paradox, right? On a sort of clickbait level, does this mean we should just be drinking as much wine as possible? That's the only explanation, Nick, I have for why this story gathered traction and why it continues to this day to kind of cloud the judgment of folks. But as we have covered in great detail on the podcast, the first episode with Rich Miller, the 2006 mouse resveratrol study was at best misinterpreted, right? So there was indeed a longevity benefit, but it's a very obscure model, right? So it was a mouse model where the mice were fed a diet of 60% coconut oil. I can't imagine what that would be like for 10 minutes, let alone for the duration of a mouse's life, especially when we consider mice are herbivores. So that wouldn't be eating coconut oil, right? They're not eating that much fat. You have these mice on 60% coconut oil diet, and the cause of death was so much fat accumulation in the liver that the liver expanded into the hemithorax and collapsed their lungs. So again, usually when we do experiments with mice, they die based on their genetic predilection to die of cancer. And we're typically trying to ask the question, hey, like in the case of rapamycin, like you give rapamycin to these mice, they get less cancer than these mice. Well, no. Here we're force feeding them coconut oil to turn their livers into big blobs of fat that expand into their chest and compress their lungs. And it turned out that under those conditions, there was a shorter time, or I should say a longer time to death, on average, median lifespan, if they were on resveratrol than if they were not. It turned out, by the way, there was no difference in maximal lifespan. So you didn't shift the curve of mortality for the top 10% of mice. You just shifted it for the median mice. Somehow that generated all of the interest in this drug. And very few people paid attention when the ITP came along and said, we're going to study this really, really rigorously, right? We're going to study this in mice that are not chronogenetic mutants, and we're not going to force feed them, fat. We're going to give them normal mouse food and watch them die of normal mouse deaths. It made no difference. So they gave them 300 milligrams of resveratrol per kilo of food, which is 300 ppm. Again, just for comparison's sake, guys, wine is like less than 2 ppm, parts per million of resveratrol. They're giving them 300 ppm, and didn't happen. Now, the folks who say resveratrol works criticize that study, saying the bioavailability is low. And therefore, you need much, much, much more than the 300 ppm that was given in that study. Again, that was a concern and a criticism that was only voiced after the study. The proponents of resveratrol were involved in that study, and they signed off. I mean, they're on the paper. I mean, this was their view. So I just have a hard time believing that there is any value in resveratrol. That's why I don't take it, independent of the fact that it's still a ubiquitous compound that's found everywhere.